I was called trash at my husband's family dinner, their laughter echoing like knives against porcelain. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just lowered my gaze and let them believe I was powerless. But while they drank champagne and mocked me, I was memorizing every detail of the multi-million deal Richard bragged about. By dawn, my silence had turned into a weapon sharper than any insult. One phone call, just one, and his empire began to crumble before the sun even rose. They thought I was disposable. They were about to discover I was fire disguised as ash. I learned early that silence could be both a prison and a weapon. For years, in the shadow of my husband's wealthy family, I played the role they assigned me. The meek wife with no ambition, a woman content to smile and pour wine while they discussed million-dollar ventures. They saw me as background noise in their empire of steel and glass. At dinners, Richard, my husband's father, spoke loudly of his brilliance, of the empire he had built, and of the future he claimed only men like him could control. And when his eyes turned toward me, there was always that gleam of disdain, as if I were a stray dog that had wandered into his mansion. The night he called me trash, his words did not pierce me. They ignited something. I didn't argue. I let my silence harden like tempered glass. Because while he gloated, I noticed the folder on his tablet, one he tried to shield when his phone buzzed. I had seen that file name before, Project Clifftop. And though Richard believed no one at the table could decipher the acronyms, I once built models from those very terms. Before I married into his family, I had been a financial strategist handling global data funds. My credentials were tucked away like old letters in a locked drawer, but my memory remained razor sharp. That night, when the house went quiet and their laughter had dissolved into snores upstairs, I slipped into Richard's study. The key was easy. Arrogance made him careless. He never imagined I would dare. His tablet hummed to life beneath my fingers. And there it was, a data set so vast it felt alive, streams of climate information purchased, hidden, hoarded. Temperature projections, rising sea levels, carbon indexes, all sealed away. The numbers told a story that could rewrite markets, governments, even survival itself. It wasn't just wealth, it was control of the future. I sat in his leather chair, the word trash echoing in my head, and realized the irony. The man who mocked me had locked away a treasure more powerful than his towers of glass. He was hiding the truth, not only from the world but from his own investors. And I, the invisible daughter-in-law, now held it in my hands. The glow of the screen painted me in blue light. I could have copied the files, dumped them all at once, but I wasn't reckless. I knew that a single spark could set a forest aflame if placed carefully. My hands trembled, not from fear but from the thrill of possibility. For the first time since marrying into this family, I wasn't just enduring their contempt. I was above them, even if they didn't know it yet. I returned to my room before dawn. My husband stirred but didn't wake. I lay beside him, eyes open, heartbeat steady. I had a secret now, one big enough to fracture the foundations his father had spent decades cementing. The next morning, as Richard boasted about his upcoming negotiations, I quietly brewed my coffee and listened. He mentioned Clifftop with pride, as if the world were his pawn. My gaze lingered on him, but my mind was elsewhere, already building scenarios, already imagining the shape of my first move. That afternoon, while the family lounged by the pool, I sat in the corner of the library with my phone. The footage I shot was only 60 seconds long, a glimpse of numbers flashing across a dark screen, subtle enough not to reveal everything, powerful enough to suggest that something monumental was being concealed. I didn't show my face, just my voice, low and steady, saying, "The truth has been buried, but fire always finds its way through ash." I uploaded it to a new account I had created the night before, anonymous, untethered, free. Minutes later, Notifications began to pulse like a heartbeat, views climbing, comments flooding in. Some dismissed it as conspiracy. Others demanded answers. And within an hour, people were dissecting each frame, each figure speculating about government cover-ups, corporate manipulation, environmental collapse. The air itself felt charged, like the moment before a storm breaks. By evening, the clip had spread beyond my control. It was no longer mine. It belonged to the swarm. Hashtags multiplied, debates erupted, news blogs picked it up. Someone slowed down the video and highlighted one particular number, sea level rise projected at twice the current estimates. Suddenly, it wasn't just a clip. It was a revelation. Richard had no idea. He sat at dinner again, laughing, lecturing, dismissing the concerns of others. He couldn't sense the digital wildfire already consuming his carefully guarded empire. I watched him across the table, his glass raised in arrogance, and I smiled, not the brittle mask I usually wore, but a quiet, dangerous smile, because I knew what he didn't, that his empire was already cracking. And this time, I wasn't going to stay silent. The 60-second clip was only the beginning. I knew if I left it there, curiosity would flicker and then die, another ghost in the endless scroll of the internet. To burn longer, a fire needed oxygen, so I gave it a shape, a place where strangers could gather around the spark. I built a small platform in the shadows of the web, hidden beneath a name that meant nothing yet, Ashlens. The interface was simple, almost playful. Visitors were greeted by puzzles, riddles, and fragments of images. Behind each solved piece lay a shard of the dataset I had taken from Richard's tablet. Nothing too overt, nothing that could tie directly back to me, just enough to draw them deeper. Within hours, people began to treat it like a treasure hunt, a number sequence that led to a chart, a distorted image that, when corrected, revealed maps of coastlines vanishing under waves, a sound file layered with voices whispering projections of temperature rises. Every discovery was shared, discussed, torn apart by strangers who had no idea they were piecing together the very secrets Richard had tried to bury. The comments shifted quickly from curiosity to conviction. "Is this real?" became, "Why didn't we know this before?" Then came, "Who is hiding this from us?" I watched it unfold on my phone as I sat at the breakfast table, Richard reading the financial section of the paper, oblivious to the world beneath his nose, unraveling his empire, one riddle at a time. The thrill was intoxicating. For years they had made me invisible. Now I was everywhere and nowhere at once, orchestrating a movement that no one could trace back to the woman pouring coffee across the table. By the end of the week, Ashlens had tens of thousands of users. Forums buzzed, influencers speculated, amateur scientists tried to verify the numbers. Each clip, each puzzle fragment was dissected like scripture. They weren't just watching anymore. They were working with me, carrying the torch I had lit. My anonymity didn't distance me. It bound them to me. Together, we were shaping a story bigger than any one person. But fires attract attention, and soon so did mine. Richard's company issued a press release, dismissing the rumors of a data leak as internet nonsense. He framed it as the paranoia of a restless generation, insisting the information being shared was incomplete, misinterpreted, even fabricated. His smug smile on the televised interview made my blood run hot. He didn't just deny it, he insulted those who dared to question. That night, as he raised a toast in the dining room to his own brilliance, I released another clip. This time, not a puzzle, a straight cut. Raw figures scrolling across a black screen accompanied by my voice once more. Calm, steady, undeniable. They said it was a hoax. But look closer. The numbers don't lie. Ask yourself, why would they hide this from you? The reaction was explosive. Within hours, the video surged across every platform. Hashtags turned into banners of resistance. Protests began forming outside corporate headquarters. Environmental groups latched onto the message, demanding transparency. Scientists who had been silenced for years resurfaced, emboldened by the sudden swell of voices echoing mine. I watched the chaos unfold from my living room, Richard's laughter booming from the next room as he entertained guests. He still didn't see the wildfire, didn't feel the ground shifting beneath him. To him, I was still the silent, useless wife. To the world, I was becoming something else entirely, a phantom with proof, a whisper with weight. The comments on the latest clip cut deeper than I expected. People weren't just outraged at Richard or his company. They were furious on my behalf, though they didn't know who I was. They treat us like fools. They think we can't handle the truth. We've been lied to, and it ends now. The flame was no longer mine alone. It belonged to everyone who had touched it, spread it, carried it further than I ever could have alone. By the week's end, Richard's empire faced its first real crack. Stockholders demanded answers. Reporters swarmed the gates. My husband sat at the edge of the bed one night, rubbing his temples, muttering that his father seemed distracted, angrier than usual. I stayed quiet, nodding sympathetically, while my phone buzzed with another surge of notifications. The uprising had begun. It wasn't revenge anymore. It was a reckoning. Hope is dangerous. It spreads faster than fear, faster than lies. Within days of my second release, I was no longer alone in the shadows of the web. Journalists began to reach out cautiously at first, anonymous emails, encrypted messages. Then came activists, climate researchers, even university students who had seen enough to know the numbers were real. They didn't know who I was, and I intended to keep it that way. But they believed in the spark I had lit, and they wanted to carry it further. I began collaborating quietly, each step calculated. I funneled pieces of the dataset into the hands of investigative reporters, guiding them toward the most explosive truths. The journalists packaged the information into articles that shook the financial pages, while environmental organizations wove the data into campaigns, billboards, and street protests. Podcasts dissected the implications late into the night. Infographics painted grim futures that spread like wildfire across feeds. The story was no longer just numbers. It was everywhere, in every format, every medium. For the first time in years, I felt something I had thought I lost: belonging. These strangers, faces I had never seen, were united in outrage, in determination, and I was part of it, though they would never know my name. Each night, while Richard snored in his leather chair, I scrolled through the feeds, watching my whispers transform into roars. There was something beautiful in that chorus. Hope had become tangible, but hope, I knew, could not exist without resistance, and resistance always provoked retaliation. Richard struck back with the full weight of his empire. The first blow came in the form of a glossy press conference, cameras flashing as he denounced the leaks as the work of a faceless anarchist intent on destabilizing the economy. He used words like fabrication and sabotage. He promised lawsuits, investigations, criminal charges. He claimed the leak numbers were taken out of context, manipulated to look catastrophic. His voice dripped with authority, the kind that had silenced countless people before me. My husband replayed the broadcast at home, muttering that perhaps the culprit should be punished, that the family was under siege. I sat on the couch, nodding at the right times, though my pulse thundered. They had no idea the saboteur was sitting beside them, her fingers curled around the phone that had lit the fire. Then came the more personal strikes. Anonymous threats appeared in comment sections, echoing Richard's accusations. A legal notice arrived at the door, his lawyers preparing a case against whoever was behind the leaks. Trash, he had called me before, but now he named me publicly, though without evidence. Some nobody, a parasite, desperate for attention. His words weren't aimed at me directly. He still didn't know, but I felt the sting as if he had spoken them across the table again. The shift was swift. Where days earlier I had felt only momentum, Now a creeping anxiety slid into my chest. What if they found out? What if the mask slipped? My husband, my anonymity, my life as I knew it, all would collapse. The fear was sharp, but beneath it was something sharper still: resolve. Late at night, I spoke with the journalists through encrypted calls. "He'll try to discredit everything," one warned. "He'll dig for you, whoever you are." "He already is," I whispered. "But the fire is bigger than me now. Even if he finds me, he can't put it out." Still, fear clung to me. Each sound at the door, each glance from my husband made me wonder if the game was over. At dinner, Richard's eyes darted around the table, suspicion seething. "Whoever this traitor is," he snarled, "they'll regret crossing me." I forced myself to look down at my plate, the perfect portrait of submission. While inside, I rehearsed my next move. The fire was growing too fast to contain, and with it came a danger I hadn't fully grasped. I had wanted to spark change, but now I was fanning an inferno that threatened to consume everything. The protests outside Richard's office swelled in size. Investors began to demand accountability. Entire news cycles revolved around the leaks. Yet instead of bending, Richard doubled down, calling me a criminal, a terrorist. Each insult stung, but it also solidified the truth. He was afraid. Hope had carried me here, but now fear sat beside it, breathing down my neck. For every cheer from the crowd, there was a shadow waiting to silence me. The world I had awakened was alive and burning, but if I wasn't careful, I would burn with it. Anxiety had stalked me for weeks, breathing cold into the back of my neck. Every protest outside Richard's headquarters, every headline dissecting the leaks, every furious word he hurled into microphones tightened the knot in my chest. But fear, I realized, could only hold me so long. I had spent years letting silence bind me. Now the fire was burning too fast to stop, and I had a choice: hide or shape it. That was when the idea struck, not just to expose, not just to destroy, but to build. If Richard had hoarded the data to guard wealth for his empire, I would flip the equation. I would use the same numbers to create opportunity outside his reach. In the quiet of my study, I designed the blueprint for a community-powered fund. It wasn't complicated in essence. Anyone could invest, even in small amounts, and the capital would flow into startups devoted to climate solutions, renewable energy, clean tech, sustainable infrastructure. The data set gave me an edge, not to exploit, but to guide, to predict which ventures had the strongest foundation. What Richard tried to bury, I would use to empower. Launching it was a risk. I had no name, no credibility in this anonymous role I had chosen. But momentum was already on my side. The hashtags, the protests, the conversations, they all pointed to one truth. People were desperate for action. They didn't just want to know, they wanted to do. I gave them away. The platform went live under the same banner as the leaks, Ashlands. The announcement was simple: if they won't invest in the future, we will, together. The response stunned me. Within days, contributions poured in, small donations at first, then larger sums as trust built. Strangers began to call themselves embers, carrying the flame forward. They didn't know me, yet they believed in the cause. The fund grew, and with it, so did my sense of power, not the hollow, domineering power Richard clung to, but something alive, collective, unstoppable. For the first time since this began, the fear loosened. I felt like I was breathing freely again. Not just a saboteur, not just a wife dismissed as trash, but a creator, a leader of something larger than revenge. News outlets couldn't ignore it. Grassroots Climate Fund gains traction, splashed across feeds. Analysts debated whether it could disrupt traditional finance. Richard raged on television, insisting it was a fraud, a dangerous scam. But the numbers betrayed him. Investors who once toasted his success were now watching his empire bleed. The cracks widened. Stockholders lost confidence. Shares in his company plummeted as the public questioned what else he might be hiding. In boardrooms, whispers turned into accusations. The man who had once been untouchable now stood cornered by shadows he couldn't fight. I watched him unravel from across the dinner table. His laughter had grown brittle, his confidence an act. He snapped at servants, barked at my husband, slammed doors late into the night. And still, he didn't suspect me. To him, I was invisible, as I had always been. The irony was almost poetic, his downfall unfolding at the hands of the woman he dismissed as nothing. The final blow came when a major investor withdrew publicly, citing concerns over hidden environmental risks. The press latched on, hungry for blood. Reporters replayed his denials alongside plunging market graphs. His empire, once gleaming, unshakable, was crumbling in plain sight. The night the stock hit its lowest point, I stood on the balcony of the mansion, the city lights trembling in the distance. For years, I had felt caged by those walls, suffocated by the weight of contempt. But now, the cage was breaking. I could feel the bars bending, the air rushing in. It wasn't just about Richard anymore. It wasn't even about revenge. It was about rewriting the rules of power. If data could be weaponized to hoard and silence, it could also be used to liberate and unite. I wasn't just tearing down his empire. I was building something he could never understand, a fire that belonged to everyone. And as his authority crumbled, mine was just beginning to rise. Success tastes strange when you've spent years swallowing humiliation. The fund was thriving. News anchors called it a financial wildfire, spreading beyond borders, uniting people across continents. Activists hailed me as a visionary, though they didn't know my face or name. Strangers online spoke of Ashlands as if it were a force of nature, inevitable and unstoppable. And yet beneath the glow of victory, a question gnawed at me. What did power do to those who held it too long? Offers began arriving, dressed in polished language and heavy signatures. Corporations that once sneered at grassroots movements now sent representatives to court me. They offered partnerships, endless funding, exclusive access to distribution networks. All they wanted, they said, was a seat at the table. Together, they promised, we can scale your vision globally. It should have thrilled me. Instead, it terrified me. Their words mirrored the ones I'd heard in Richard's boardroom. Phrases about growth, efficiency, control. They spoke of maximizing return on investment, not protecting the world. Behind their smiles, I recognized the same hunger that had built Richard's empire, the same hunger that had once dismissed me as worthless. Late at night, alone with my phone screen's glow, I scrolled through their proposals. They promised billions. They promised influence. They promised immortality through institutions. And for a fleeting second, I imagined it. The chance to eclipse Richard entirely, to become the name spoken with reverence in every financial hall, to wield the same power he once used against me. The thought sent a shiver down my spine. Was this how it began? Not with cruelty, but with seduction. Not with insults, but with opportunity. If I said yes, if I signed one contract, how long before I became another Richard, hoarding knowledge, bending truth for profit, forgetting the fire that had started this journey? I lay awake listening to my husband breathe beside me, and the house seemed heavier than ever. I could almost hear Richard's voice echoing in the halls, mocking me for believing I was any different. The battle outside had become a battle within. Success had given me a mirror, and in it, I saw not just triumph, but temptation. I thought of the women who had written to me anonymously, sharing stories of being silenced, dismissed, mocked, as I had been. They believed in Ashlands. They believed in the fire. If I let it become just another corporate brand, I would betray them as thoroughly as Richard had betrayed me. One evening, I met with a delegation from a major investment firm. They filled the room with confidence, their suits pressed sharp, their smiles calculated. With us, one said smoothly, You'll no longer need to hide. You could lead openly, control billions. Imagine what you could do with that kind of influence. I imagined it, and then I remembered the data set glowing in Richard's study, hidden like contraband, while the world outside begged for truth. I remembered the word trash, the taste of silence forced down my throat. I remembered why I had lit the match in the first place. No, I said, my voice steady. This doesn't belong to me, and it doesn't belong to you. It belongs to everyone. Their smiles faltered. They tried again, offering sweeter promises, warning me of the chaos that could come without their structure. But I held firm. The fire I had lit wasn't meant to be caged. In the days that followed, I made my decision clear. Ashlands would remain independent, transparent. No single entity would hold control. Not me, not a corporation, not a government. It would exist as a commons, open and unclaimed, a place where the truth could flow freely and where communities, not shareholders, would decide its course. The backlash was immediate. Headlines screamed that I had turned down salvation, that I was reckless, unprofessional, even delusional. Analysts predicted the fund would collapse without corporate backing. Richard sneered on live television, calling me a fool hiding behind shadows. But something else happened too. Messages poured in, not from CEOs, but from ordinary people. Farmers, teachers, students, mothers, they thanked me for refusing. They said the choice gave them hope, that for once someone had chosen integrity over profit. And in their words, I felt the weight of my doubt lift. I was no longer haunted by the fear of becoming like Richard. I had chosen differently, and in doing so, I had lit a path no corporate giant could replicate. I wasn't chasing empire. I was chasing light. The fire burned brighter, not because of the money or the headlines, but because people began to believe again, in truth, in resilience, in each other. That was the ember worth protecting. The decision to remain independent changed everything. Overnight, Ashland stopped being just a leak or a fund. It became a movement. Yet I knew movements without structure burned out too fast, collapsing under their own fire. If I wanted this to last beyond me, I had to give it form, something that would endure even when my name, or my anonymity, faded. So I built it. A platform unlike anything Richard or his allies could imagine. An open data commons, woven from the same dataset I had stolen but multiplied, translated, and reshaped into something new. Every number was contextualized through stories, videos, interactive maps, lessons written for classrooms, and financial tools for communities. Not just a vault of information, but a living library where truth breathed and grew. Anyone, anywhere could contribute, verify, or create from it. A child in Jakarta could turn projections into an animation. A teacher in Nairobi could use the charts to explain climate futures to her students. A startup founder in São Paulo could identify opportunities to innovate. I called it the Ember Network, because embers, once scattered, can ignite fires across miles. The day it launched, I watched in awe as the world stepped in. Within hours, volunteers uploaded translations, designers submitted infographics, scientists released long-buried papers, storytellers turned dry data into narratives that touched hearts. It wasn't mine anymore. It was everyone's. I had imagined legacy as a distant thing, something measured in decades. But here, in real time, I saw it unfold. A living, breathing legacy of collaboration. For the first time, the bitterness of Richard's voice, calling me trash, mocking my silence, felt irrelevant. His empire had been built on secrecy and arrogance. Mine, if I could call it mine at all, was being built on openness and trust. The contrast was almost too stark to believe, but legacy isn't born without sacrifice. I knew I could never step into the spotlight, never claim ownership. To reveal myself would risk everything: credibility, momentum, safety. Instead, I remained the ghost behind the curtain, content to let the flame belong to all. And strangely, that anonymity felt more powerful than any title. The backlash continued, of course. Richard's remaining allies called the Ember Network dangerous, irresponsible, even anarchic. Without authority, they said, truth becomes chaos. But the people didn't listen. They saw the platform as theirs. Each contribution was a vote of defiance, each shared story a declaration that knowledge could no longer be caged. Weeks turned into months, and I watched the ripple effects stretch farther than I had dreamed. Local communities began using the tools to lobby their governments. Small investors pooled resources into green startups, guided by transparent projections. Universities reshaped curricula around the network's data. The fire had become something no single hand could smother. One evening, I stood alone on the balcony. The city spread beneath me like a constellation. For years, this house had felt like a prison, its walls echoing with contempt. Now, even here, I felt free. I thought of the journey, the humiliation, the silence, the fear. And then I thought of this. Millions of voices connected, alight with the same flame. I wasn't the girl at the dinner table anymore, staring down at her plate while laughter cut her to pieces. I wasn't the wife dismissed as an ornament. I wasn't the shadow in Richard's mansion. I was the ember that refused to die, the spark that refused to be silenced. As the wind carried the city's hum to my ears, I whispered to myself, not in anger, but in reverence. They thought I was disposable, but I was fire disguised as ash. Somewhere, far below, a protest erupted into song. Voices rose together, chanting words I had once spoken in secret. The sound climbed through the night air until it reached me, and I felt it settle in my chest like a promise. I closed my eyes, letting the chorus wrap around me. The flame wasn't mine anymore. It was eternal, carried by countless hands, countless voices. Even if I vanished tomorrow, it would remain. I had been reborn, not as a woman defined by their contempt, but as a symbol of defiance, of hope, of truth. And no empire, no insult, no man could ever take that away again.